India and the US have signed a military pact. The CCP goes after political opponents abroad, and how one Chinese city is predicting the outcome of the US election. That and more on this week's China News Headlines. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. This week's China News Headlines. It's something Beijing has been terrified of for years. India and the United States are signing a landmark military agreement. Now, before I tell you more, did you know 60% of you who watch the show aren't subscribed? It would really mean a lot to me if you could hit that subscribe button. It's a huge help to the show, and you can always unsubscribe later if you want. In fact, YouTube might just randomly unsubscribe you even if you don't want. Okay, so this military agreement between India and the US is a big deal. The agreement is called the Basic Exchange and Cooperation Agreement for Geospatial Cooperation. It's a mechanism for India and the US to share military intelligence, particularly military satellite surveillance, which might be useful in, I don't know, the high mountain passes of the Himalayas, where Chinese soldiers have been encroaching on the Indian border. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and Secretary of Defense Mark Esper visited New Delhi this week, and Pompeo had some strong words on the Chinese Communist Party.
Our leaders and our citizens see with increasing clarity that the CCP is no friend to democracy, the rule of law, transparency, nor to freedom of navigation, the foundation of a free and open and prosperous Indo Pacific.
Speaking of the Indo Pacific, the US, Australia, Japan, and India will be participating in joint naval exercises next month, held in the Indian Ocean. These four countries make up what's known as the Quad, an informal alliance basically aimed at standing up to the Chinese Communist Party. That alliance was conceived more than a decade ago, but it did almost nothing because no one wanted to challenge China at the time. But boy, have things changed in 2020. Now, all four countries are doing joint naval exercises. Meanwhile, Secretary of State Pompeo continued his trip around Asia by bringing up the Chinese Communist Party pretty much everywhere he went. In Sri Lanka, he called the Chinese Communist Party a predator. In the Maldives, he said that Beijing was illegally occupying territory and damaging the environment. Pompeo also announced that the U.S. will be building an embassy in the Maldives. It's part of an effort to check China's influence in the region. In Indonesia, Pompeo said that the U.S. would find new ways to cooperate with Indonesia in the South China Sea. He also called China's claims there unlawful. In Indonesia, Pompeo also brought up China's religious repression, especially the treatment of the Muslim Uyghurs.
The Chinese Communist Party's war against the people of all faiths, Muslims, Buddhists, Christians, and Falun Gong practitioners alike. The atheist Chinese Communist Party has tried to convince the world that its brutalization of Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang is necessary as a part of its counterterrorism efforts or poverty alleviation, depending on which audience that they are speaking to.
Indonesia has the largest Muslim population in the world, and Pompeo asked Indonesians to not look the other way from what the Chinese Communist Party was doing.
I know that the Chinese Communist Party has tried to convince Indonesians to look away from the torments your fellow Muslims are suffering. I know that these same CCP officials have spun fantastic tales of happy Uyghurs eager to discard their ethnic, religious, and cultural identities to become more modern and enjoy the benefits of CCP-led development. When you hear these arguments, I just ask you to do this. Search your hearts. Look at the facts. Listen to the tales of the survivors and of their families.
I can see why the Chinese Communist Party really hates Mike Pompeo. The YouGov Cambridge Globalism Project did a survey of 26,000 people in 25 countries, asking them about the coronavirus. The results? China appears to have comprehensively lost the international battle for hearts and minds over its handling of coronavirus, with most people believing it was responsible for the start of the outbreak and was not transparent about the problem at the outset. This was the widest survey of global public opinion about China's handling of the pandemic. The Chinese Communist Party was not happy about the survey, mainly because they hated when anyone asked the people what they think. Also, bad news for the party. They may have a massive new coronavirus outbreak on their hands in Xinjiang, where they have those concentration camps. According to state-run media, there was one case of the coronavirus in the city of Kashgar. And so within 2 days, they tested everyone in the city, all 4.75 million of them. It's hard to know what to make of this news. China has definitely exaggerated its ability to do mass coronavirus testing. But it could also be that the coronavirus situation might be much worse than the Chinese government is telling people. Or both. Officially, the testing drive so far identified 137 additional cases, and all are asymptomatic. And when has the CCP ever lied about coronavirus numbers? Don't answer that. In July, there was another outbreak in Xinjiang's capital, Urumqi. That resulted in an insane lockdown, where officials forced residents to take unproven COVID drugs. Makes sense. If you're already ethnically cleansing the region, might as well test out some experimental drugs on them, right? Speaking of crimes against humanity, organ harvesting. It's a thing Chinese state-run hospitals do because selling dissidents' organs to rich people can make you a lot of money. Well, at a recent online press conference, a journalist from Taiwan raised the issue. This was the U.S. Assistant Secretary of State's response.
Well, I can't think of a more horrific human rights abuse than stealing somebody's liver. I mean, we have had consistent reports of this. We have actually looked into allegations of it, and I encourage anybody who has information that we could use to nail this down to please be in touch with us.
This follows the final ruling earlier this year of the China Tribunal. It found that forced organ harvesting has been committed for years throughout China on a significant scale, and Falun Gong practitioners have been one and probably the main source of organ supply. And in regard to Uyghurs, the tribunal had evidence of medical testing on a scale that could allow them, amongst other uses, to become an organ bank. Why haven't you heard more about that? Well, according to former New York Times journalist Didi Kirsten Tatlow, who submitted testimony to the China Tribunal, her editors discouraged her from reporting about the issue. In her testimony, Tatlow says her editors believed that the Chinese state was no longer harvesting organs from prisoners. She was told that there was nothing new to the story, and that people who believed this was happening to prisoners of conscience were on the fringes of advocacy. I mean, why anger the Chinese authorities and put your entire company's China bureau at risk just to cover one story, right? Ironically, the Chinese government eventually expelled the New York Times anyway, for unrelated reasons. Even today, the medical community is mostly turning a blind eye to forced organ harvesting. Well, gosh, if they have a blind eye, they should go to China. I hear you can get great cornea transplants there. No questions asked. And stay tuned after the break because Chinese leaders are deciding the future of China. Welcome back. China's communist leaders met behind closed doors this week to discuss their 14th five-year plan. That's when the Communist Party plans out the next 5 years of the economy, because China is still communist and has a planned economy, in case anyone tries to tell you otherwise. In the lead up to the meeting, Chinese Chairman Xi Jinping made a bunch of personnel changes. That includes appointing new and loyal heads to China's biggest state-run media organizations, Xinhua and People's Daily. Wow, stop the presses. No, seriously, stop the presses. You need to make sure you're following party guidelines. Ready for a story just dripping with delicious irony? The Communist Party of the Philippines has ordered its armed wing to target Chinese-owned companies operating in the country. Communists just can't seem to get along. The Communist Party has been outlawed in the Philippines, but the communist guerrilla group says these Chinese infrastructure projects not only displace thousands of peasants and minorities from their land, they also wreak havoc on the natural ecosystem of the country's remaining forests. I mean, they're not wrong. We did an episode about how a Chinese-built dam in Malaysia could kill thousands. Check it out. But even if the Chinese Communist Party may not have allies in communist parties in developing countries, at least it still has friends in Europe. Officials at the European Parliament and the European Commission have hired Hikvision to supply thermal imaging cameras for their buildings. It's to test people's temperatures to see if they have the coronavirus. Hikvision is a great choice. They have a long, proud history of using their surveillance equipment in those Muslim internment camps in Xinjiang. Hikvision is also tied to China's People's Liberation Army. So good job, EU. You have literally installed PLA cameras in your buildings. The FBI has indicted 8 Chinese operatives for harassing Chinese dissidents in the U.S. These Chinese operatives were part of what's called Operation Fox Hunt. The Chinese government claims it is an international anti-corruption campaign, but the U.S. believes to be a plot to target political opponents and critics. Makes sense. China's domestic anti-corruption campaign is also used to target political opponents and critics. As part of the FBI investigation, at one point, one of the defendants and an unidentified co-conspirator allegedly placed a note on the door of a John Doe's home that said, "If you are willing to go back to the mainland and spend 10 years in prison, your wife and children will be all right." That's the end of this matter. The Chinese Communist Party, it always thinks of the children. The Chinese city of Yiwu is predicting the outcome of the upcoming U.S. election. Factories there make a lot of cheap products for the U.S. market. And according to the New York Times, President Trump's campaign paraphernalia, hats, banners, mugs, practically anything else that can carry a logo, has been selling briskly. By contrast, shop owners said during recent visits, bulk orders for materials supporting former Vice President Joseph R. Biden Jr. have been almost non-existent. This is how an almost unknown Chinese city was able to accurately predict the winner of the 2016 presidential election, months ahead of time, when major American media still had no clue on the day of the election. We'll know next week if the Yiwu Index, as it's called, is right again. At least, I hope we'll know next week. And now, it's time for me to answer a question from one of you who supports China Uncensored on the crowdfunding website Patreon. Joseph Griffith asks, is flood season over in China? That's a good question because the flood season this year was devastating. It's hard to get accurate figures since China downplays the damage and deaths in natural disasters. But at least 15 million people were affected in a record-breaking flood season. There were 21 large-scale floods this year. The last time flooding was this bad was in 1998, at least according to my favorite Chinese state-run media, the Global Times. That seems to be mostly over, which is good because the massive Three Gorges Dam had begun to deform under the pressure of all those floodwaters. That would have been a black swan disaster for the Chinese Communist Party. But it seems like for this year, that swan has flown. Anyway, thanks for your question, Joseph. And thank you for watching. Remember, it's hard for us to keep this show running. There's not a lot of money in criticizing China, which is why we rely on your support on the crowdfunding website Patreon. For as little as $1 an episode, you can help us in our fight against the Chinese Communist Party. Head over to patreon.com/China Uncensored. You'll also get some other cool perks and you can ask me a question. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.